Let me tell you what a gavel sounds like when it's about to destroy a lie. Not loud, exactly. Not dramatic. Just, final. Like a door closing on a room you can never enter again. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get to the story. I was sitting in the second row of Judge Abrams's courtroom, wearing the same navy blouse I'd worn to my husband's funeral and my daughter's second wedding. My hands were folded in my lap. My back was straight. And inside my chest, my heart was beating so hard I thought the court reporter might include it in the transcript. 3 rows ahead sat the Harper family, Harold with his expensive suit and practiced smile, Lydia with her trembling hands and desperate eyes, and Dean, 17 years old, 6 feet tall, and utterly convinced that his parents' money could erase the fact that he'd stabbed my grandson and laughed about it. They thought this was a family matter. A misunderstanding. A case of me being too emotional and refusing to see both sides. Judge Abrams flipped through the sealed medical file, the one I'd hand-delivered to Prosecutor Torres 3 weeks earlier, the one that contained every timestamp, every photograph, every piece of evidence that proved what had really happened the night of October 3rd. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harper," he said, and Lydia flinched like she'd been slapped, "you've stated under oath that your mother is exaggerating the severity of the incident. That your stepson Eli is overly sensitive and that Dean was just playing around." Lydia nodded frantically. "Yes, Your Honor, that's..." I'm not finished. The room went cold. The medical report I'm holding describes a 4-inch laceration to the left thoracic cavity, penetrating the pleural membrane and causing a partial pneumothorax, a collapsed lung, Mrs. Harper. The weapon trajectory indicates a downward stabbing motion with significant force. The blood loss required emergency transfusion. And according to the 911 call logs. He paused, looked directly at me. The only person who called for help was the victim's grandmother. "You and your husband actively discouraged emergency intervention." Harold started to stand. The bailiff's hand landed gently on his shoulder, and he sat back down. Dean's smirk, the one I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that said I can get away with anything, finally, began to fade. "This wasn't an accident," Judge Abrams said quietly. "This was assault with a deadly weapon. And the subsequent cover-up constitutes obstruction of justice and child endangerment." The gavel came down. And with it, every lie they'd told. My name is Keira Charlton, and this is the story of how I stopped being the hysterical grandmother, and became the woman who refused to let my grandson's blood be washed away with excuses. But to understand how we ended up in that courtroom, you need to know where it started. Not with the stabbing. Not even with Dean's cruelty, which had been escalating for months. It started the day my daughter Lydia married Harold Harper and brought his son into a house where my quiet, brilliant grandson had finally begun to feel safe. I'm Keira Charlton. I spent 35 years as a trauma nurse, the kind who could insert an 4-line into a dying patient while coding them, the kind who documented every bruise pattern because I knew that sometimes the only voice a victim has is the medical record someone bothered to write down. I believed in systems. In procedure. In the idea that if you followed the rules and told the truth, things would work out the way they were supposed to. Then my daughter married Harold Harper, and I learned that some people are very good at making the truth look hysterical. Lydia met Harold 18 months after my son-in-law Marcus died of a sudden heart attack at 43. She needed stability, she said. Someone strong. What she got was Harold Harper, 48, twice divorced, regional sales manager, and owner of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had the kind of charm that works on people who want to be rescued. I didn't trust him from the first handshake. Not because of anything he did, exactly. It was more what he didn't do. He didn't ask Eli questions, he made statements about him. Kid needs to toughen up. Boys his age should be playing sports, not reading all the time. His son Dean was 16 then, tall, athletic, with his father's sharp features. When Harold promised during the vows to love and protect Eli as his own, Dean caught my eye and smirked. Not a smile. A smirk. The kind that says, I know something you don't. They moved into Harold's house 3 weeks after the honeymoon. Eli's new room was in the basement. More privacy, Harold explained. Dean's room was upstairs, next to the master bedroom, with an attached bathroom and a view of the pool. The cruelty started small. Dean borrowed Eli's headphones and returned them broken. Told Eli's friends at school that Eli still wet the bed. Started calling Eli Marcus Jr. in a mocking voice, imitating the stutter Eli had developed after his father's death. I saw it happening in real time, Eli shrinking into himself, his voice getting quieter, his shoulders hunching forward like he was trying to take up less space. When I asked him how things were going, he'd say, "Fine, Grandma. Everything's fine." But his eyes said otherwise. They had that flat, empty look I'd seen in the ER, the look of someone who's learned that screaming doesn't bring help, it just makes the pain last longer. The breaking point came last spring. I found Eli at the bottom of the basement stairs with his wrist cradled against his chest, face pale and streaked with tears. "I fell," he said quickly. Too quickly. The stairs were carpeted. There was nothing to trip on. When I looked up toward the top of the stairs, I saw Dean watching us, that same smirk on his face. Hairline fracture of the radius. 6 weeks in a splint. When I confronted Lydia and Harold, they were a united front. Eli admitted he tripped, Harold said calmly. Dean wasn't even upstairs when it happened. Cameras that conveniently didn't cover the stairwell. "He's terrorizing Eli," I said. "And you're letting it happen." "Keira, you need to trust that we know what's happening in our own home," Harold replied. "Blended families are complicated." "This isn't complicated," I said. "This is abuse." Lydia started crying. Harold put his arm around her. "I think you should leave," he said quietly. And I did. I left my grandson in that house, and I've regretted it every day since. Then, on October 3rd at 2:17 in the morning, my phone rang. "Hello?" Silence. Then, so quiet I almost missed it, "Grandma." "Eli?" "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" His voice was trembling. He stabbed me." The world stopped. "What? Who stabbed you? Where are you?" "Home. Kitchen." "Dean, there's a lot of blood, Grandma." "Are your mother and Harold there?" "Yeah, but they're not calling anyone." "Dad, Harold says I'm being dramatic." "Mom's crying." He's laughing, Grandma." "He's just standing there laughing." Something broke inside me. "Listen to me, baby. Press something clean against the wound. Apply pressure." "Can you do that?" "I'm getting in my car right now." "Grandma, I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart. But you're going to be okay. I promise." When I pulled into their driveway 15 minutes later, every light in the house was on. The front door was unlocked. I didn't knock. The kitchen looked wrong. Not chaotic, wrong because it was too calm. Lydia was at the sink washing dishes with trembling hands. Harold stood near the refrigerator, arms crossed, watching me like I was the one disrupting their evening. Dean sat on a bar stool holding an ice pack to his knuckles, smirking. And Eli was crumpled against the base of the kitchen cabinets, face pale as paper, one hand pressed against his left side, blood seeping through his fingers and pooling on the tile floor. I was across the room in 3 steps. "I'm here, baby." I lifted the towel carefully. 4-inch puncture wound, left thoracic cavity, just below the ribcage. Active bleeding. Shallow, rapid breathing. Collapsed lung. "Did anyone call 911? I demanded, already reaching for my phone. "He's fine," Harold said. "It's a shallow cut. Boy's roughhouse." "This isn't roughhousing. This is a stab wound. He needs an ambulance." "Please don't overreact," Lydia said. "We don't need to involve the authorities. It was an accident." "Where's the weapon?" "I put it in the sink," Lydia said quickly. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. She'd washed the knife. Destroyed evidence while her son bled out. I dialed 911. This is Keira Charlton, retired RN. I have a 16-year-old male with a puncture wound to the left thoracic cavity, significant blood loss, signs of shock. I need an ambulance immediately. The operator asked if the scene was secure. The attacker is still on scene, I said clearly. 17-year-old male. Weapon has been tampered with. Harold's face went white. When the paramedics arrived, I gave them a clear report. As they loaded Eli onto the stretcher, Dean called out, "Tell M you're sorry for being so dramatic, Marcus Jr." And he laughed. I walked back across that blood-stained kitchen floor and looked Dean Harper directly in the eyes. "You just tried to kill my grandson," I said quietly. "And you're going to prove it." Eli was rushed into emergency surgery. The surgeon told me the blade had punctured his left lung, causing it to partially collapse. Another few millimeters and it would have hit the pulmonary artery. He'd have been dead in minutes, she said. "You saved his life. Can you document that?" "I already have." While Eli was in recovery, I watched Harold and Lydia talk to the police officer, performing their concerned parent routine. The officer was taking notes and nodding sympathetically. They were winning. Because that's what people like Harold Harper do. They're charming. They're believable. They make you doubt what you saw with your own eyes. But I had something they didn't. 35 years of knowing exactly how to document the truth in a way that courts can't ignore. And I was going to make sure every single piece of evidence reached the right people, no matter what it cost me. The emergency waiting room smelled like disinfectant and cold coffee. I'd been sitting in the same plastic chair for 3 hours, still wearing my blood-stained cardigan, Eli's blood, dried to a rust-brown stain across my sleeve. I couldn't bring myself to take it off. It felt like evidence. Like proof that what had happened was real, even as I watched Harold and Lydia work methodically to erase it. They stood 15 feet away, near the registration desk, speaking in hushed tones to Detective Morris, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a notepad he kept flipping through like he was looking for something that made sense. Harold had his arm around Lydia's shoulders. She was crying softly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. He was rubbing her back in slow, comforting circles. They looked like devastated parents. I looked like a hysterical old woman covered in her grandson's blood. "It was horseplay," I heard Harold say, his voice carefully measured. The boys were goofing around in the kitchen. Dean was making a sandwich. Eli came up behind him and startled him. "The knife, it was just an accident. A horrible, tragic accident." Detective Morris nodded slowly, writing something down. "And you're saying your son didn't intentionally harm the victim?" "Victim?" Harold's eyebrows lifted in polite confusion. "I think that's a strong word, Detective. Dean would never hurt Eli. They're brothers. They joke around, they push each other's buttons sometimes, sure, but this? This was just kids being kids and something going terribly wrong." Lydia let out a choked sob. "It's my fault," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have told them to stop roughhousing. I should have been watching them more closely. Oh God, if Eli dies." "He's not going to die," Harold said firmly, squeezing her shoulder. "The doctors said he's stable. This is going to be okay, honey. It's going to be okay." I felt something hot and sharp lodge itself behind my sternum. Roughhousing. Accident. Horseplay. They were building a story. Not frantically, not desperately, calmly. Methodically. Like people who'd done this before. Detective Morris glanced in my direction. For a moment, our eyes met. I thought about standing up. I thought about walking over there and telling him the truth, that Eli had called me at 2:17 in the morning, terrified, saying Dean had stabbed him and was laughing. That when I'd arrived, Harold had actively tried to stop me from calling 911. That Lydia had washed the knife while her son bled out on the kitchen floor. But I knew how it would sound. I could already hear Harold's response. She's upset. She's not thinking clearly. She and Lydia have been having some tension lately. Keira doesn't approve of our family structure. She's projecting. So I stayed in my chair. I stayed quiet. And I listened. Where's Dean now? Detective Morris asked. At home, Harold said. He was pretty shaken up. We didn't think it was appropriate to bring him here, didn't want to upset Eli or make things more stressful than they already are. But he's available if you need to speak with him. I'll probably want to do that tomorrow, Morris said. Get his account of what happened. Of course. Whatever you need. Harold's voice was calm. Cooperative. Reasonable. Lydia looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. Detective, please, I know this looks bad. I know it does. But Dean didn't mean to hurt anyone. He's a good kid. He's just a kid. Morris softened. I watched it happen in real time, the slight relaxation of his shoulders, the way his pen paused on the page. I understand, Mrs. Harper. Accidents happen. I just need to make sure we have all the facts. We appreciate that, Harold said, extending his hand. Thank you for being so understanding. They shook hands. I thought I might be sick. 20 minutes later, Dr. Sullivan emerged from the surgical wing, still wearing scrubs. Her face was tired but calm. Harold and Lydia rushed toward her immediately. How is he? Lydia asked, her voice trembling. Stable, Dr. Sullivan said. The surgery went well. We repaired the laceration to the pleural membrane and reinflated the lung. He's in recovery now. So he's going to be okay? Harold asked. With proper care and monitoring, yes. He'll need to stay in the ICU for at least 48 hours, and then we'll reassess. Lydia sagged against Harold in relief. Thank God. Thank God. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long. Doctor, can I speak with you privately? Dr. Sullivan glanced at Lydia and Harold, then nodded. Of course. We walked down the hallway, away from the waiting room. When we were out of earshot, she turned to me. You're the grandmother, correct? The one who called 911? Yes. And I'm also a retired trauma nurse. 35 years in emergency medicine. Her expression shifted slightly. Recognition. Respect. Then you know what you're looking at. I do. But I want to hear you say it. She hesitated for just a moment, then spoke quietly. The wound was deliberate. Downward force, controlled motion. The blade entered at a 45-degree angle, consistent with someone standing above the victim and driving the knife downward with intent. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't an accident. He meant to harm. The words hung in the air between us. Can you document that in your report? I asked. I already have. It's standard protocol for penetrating trauma. Angle, depth, trajectory, it's all in the surgical notes. And if someone tried to claim it was accidental? That the victim fell onto the knife? Dr. Sullivan's jaw tightened. The forensics don't support that. The wound pattern is inconsistent with a fall. I'd testify to that if necessary. I felt something inside me settle. Harden. Thank you. She studied me for a moment. Mrs. Charlton, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen a lot of things. And I've learned that the truth doesn't always speak for itself. Sometimes you have to fight for it. I intend to. They let me see Eli at 4:30 in the morning. He was unconscious, his face so pale it looked almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. Tubes snaked from his arms. A ventilator hummed softly beside the bed, breathing for him. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm, heart rate, oxygen saturation, blood pressure. I pulled a chair close and took his hand. It was cold. I'm here, baby, I whispered. I'm not going anywhere. I sat there in the blue-white glow of the ICU, watching his chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, and the memories came flooding back. Every time Lydia had dismissed a bruise. "He's clumsy, Mom. You know how boys are." Every time Dean had called him Marcus Jr., in that mocking tone while Harold chuckled like it was harmless teasing. Every time Eli had gone quiet when I asked if he was okay, his eyes begging me to drop it because talking about it only made things worse. I'd seen it happening. I'd known something was wrong. And I'd let them convince me I was overreacting. Not this time. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. I started typing. October 3rd, 2:17 a.m., Eli calls. States Dean stabbed him. Describes blood, says parents refusing to call 911. Dean laughing. October 3rd, 2:32 a.m., arrive at scene. Eli in shock, significant blood loss. Lydia washing knife in sink. Harold attempting to prevent emergency call. Dean displaying no remorse. October 3rd, 3:15 a.m., paramedics arrive. Eli transported. Harold and Lydia begin narrative control. October 3rd, 4:45 a.m., Dr. Sullivan confirms, wound deliberate, downward force, controlled motion. Not consistent with accident. I kept typing. Every detail. Every timestamp. Every word I could remember. Because I knew how this worked. I'd spent 3.5 decades in emergency rooms, documenting injuries, filing reports, watching abusers walk free because no one bothered to connect the dots. I knew that the difference between justice and a cover-up often came down to one thing: documentation. And I was very, very good at documenting. By the time the sun came up, I had 17 pages of notes on my phone. I'd photographed the bloodstain on my cardigan before the nurses brought me scrubs to change into. I'd requested copies of all of Eli's medical records from the hospital, not just from tonight, but from the past 2 years. The hairline fracture from the fall down the stairs. The concussion from the accident during gym class. The repeated visits for clumsiness. Patterns. That's what prosecutors needed. Not isolated incidents, but patterns. I was building one. At 7:30, Lydia appeared in the doorway of Eli's room. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "Mom, can we talk?" "Not here," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off Eli. "Please. I need you to understand." "Understand what?" I turned to look at her. "That your husband's son tried to kill my grandson and you washed the evidence down the sink? That you told the police it was an accident? That you've been enabling Dean's abuse for months?" Her face crumpled. "You don't know what it's like. Harold says Dean is working through some anger issues from the divorce. He says if we just give him time." Eli almost died, Lydia. "I know." Her voice broke. "I know. But Dean didn't mean." "Yes, he did." I stood up. The surgeon confirmed it. The wound trajectory proves it. Dean stabbed your son deliberately, and you are helping him get away with it. I'm trying to hold my family together. By sacrificing Eli? She flinched like I'd slapped her. "You need to leave," I said quietly. "This is my son. And you chose Harold. You chose Dean. You chose to protect the person who did this instead of the person it was done to. So yes, Lydia, you need to leave. Now." She left sobbing. I sat back down next to Eli and pulled out my phone again. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Dr. Raymond Myers. Ray had been the hospital administrator during my last 10 years in trauma. He'd retired 5 years ago and now worked as a medical consultant for legal cases, helping attorneys understand complex medical evidence, preparing expert testimony, translating doctor speak into language juries could understand. I hadn't spoken to him in 2 years. I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Keira Charlton. This is either very good news or very bad news. Ray, I need your help." "What's going on?" I took a breath. My grandson was stabbed by his stepbrother last night. The family is calling it an accident. They're lying to the police. And I have documentation that proves it. Silence. Then, send me everything you have. I'll review it today. This isn't a family fight, Ray. This is a crime. I know, he said quietly. And if what you're telling me is true, we're going to make sure everyone else knows it too. I hung up and looked at Eli, still unconscious, still breathing with the help of machines. This time, I whispered, I'm writing the ending. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a man in an expensive suit who made me sign for it like I was accepting a subpoena. In a way, I suppose I was. I opened it standing on my front porch, still holding my coffee. Cease and desist. Defamatory statements regarding Dean Harper. The letter was from Whitmore and Associates, a law firm whose letterhead alone probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. It was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple threat: stop talking about what happened, stop harassing the Harper family, and stop making unsubstantiated claims about Dean's character, or face a defamation lawsuit. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully, walked inside, and added it to the file I'd been building. Evidence item number 24, legal intimidation attempt, October 10th. Harold Harper wasn't just covering up a crime. He was waging a campaign. And he'd vastly underestimated who he was dealing with. Eli had been home from the hospital for 4 days. The doctors had released him with strict instructions: no strenuous activity, weekly follow-up appointments, watch for signs of infection or breathing difficulties. He'd barely spoken since we'd left the ICU. He moved through my house like a ghost, quiet, careful, taking up as little space as possible. He slept in my guest room with the door cracked open. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and hear him crying softly, trying to muffle the sound with his pillow so I wouldn't hear. Every time, I wanted to storm into Harold Harper's house and burn it to the ground. Instead, I documented. I took photographs of the healing wound during dressing changes. I recorded Eli's sleep patterns, his anxiety symptoms, the way he flinched every time a door opened. I kept copies of every medical bill, every prescription, every doctor's note. Because I knew how this worked. Abusers didn't just hurt people, they erased the evidence. They rewrote history. They made victims doubt their own memories. But medical records don't lie. Timestamps don't forget. And I'd spent 35 years learning how to make the truth inescapable. On Wednesday afternoon, Lydia showed up at my door. She looked terrible. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, and she was wearing the same cardigan she'd worn to the hospital 5 days ago. For a moment, standing there on my porch, she looked like my daughter again, the girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares, who'd held my hand during Marcus's funeral, who'd once trusted me to protect her. Then she opened her mouth. "Mom, please. You have to stop this." I didn't move from the doorway. "Stop what?" "You know what. The reports. The lawyers. Whatever you're planning." Her voice cracked. "Harold got a letter from the district attorney's office. They're investigating. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family? Do you have any idea what Dean did to your son? It was an accident. Lydia." I kept my voice calm. "I've seen the surgical reports. I've spoken to the surgeon. The wound trajectory proves it wasn't an accident. Dean stabbed Eli deliberately." She shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. Dean has issues. He's been through a lot with the divorce, and he's angry, yes, but he's not a monster. He's just a boy. He made a mistake. A mistake is spilling milk. This was attempted murder." "Don't say that." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare say that. You're going to ruin his life. He's 17 years old. If this goes to court, if he gets convicted, then maybe he'll learn that actions have consequences. He's a child. So is Eli." My voice rose despite myself. So is your son, Lydia. The one who called me in the middle of the night, terrified, bleeding, while you stood in the kitchen washing evidence down the sink. She flinched. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Harold said. I don't care what Harold said. I stepped closer. I care that you chose to protect the person who hurt your child instead of your child. And I care that you're still doing it. I'm trying to hold my family together. By sacrificing Eli? The words hung between us like broken glass. Lydia's face crumpled. You're tearing us apart. You're making everything worse. Eli doesn't need more drama. He needs stability. He needs his family. His family tried to kill him. Stop saying that. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Please, Mom. Please just let this go. For Eli's sake. For my sake. I'm begging you. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. And I saw what I should have seen months ago. She wasn't protecting Dean. She was protecting her denial. Because if she admitted what Dean had done, she'd have to admit that she'd married a man who enabled it. She'd have to admit that she'd chosen Harold over Eli's safety. She'd have to face the fact that her need for stability had put her son in mortal danger. And that truth was too big. Too heavy. Too unbearable. So she was rewriting it into something smaller. Something manageable. An accident. A misunderstanding. A family matter. Lydia, I said quietly, I love you. I always will. But I'm not going to let you rewrite reality to make yourself feel better. Eli almost died. And if I don't fight for him, nobody will. I'm his mother. Then act like it. She stared at me for a long moment, her face pale and stricken. Then she turned and walked away without another word. I watched her get into her car and drive off. And I felt something inside me break and harden at the same time. That evening, I found Eli sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing. He was wearing one of his father's old sweatshirts, the sleeves hanging past his hands. He looked so small. I sat down beside him. How are you feeling? He shrugged. Okay. Eli. He didn't look at me. I don't want to cause more trouble, Grandma. My heart cracked. Sweetheart, you're not causing trouble. Dean caused this. Not you. But everyone's fighting because of me. Mom's upset. Harold's lawyers are calling. Dean's, his voice broke. Dean's telling everyone at school that I'm a liar. That I'm trying to ruin his life. Is that what he's saying? Yeah. He posted about it. Said I fell and blamed him because I'm jealous that Mom loves him more. I felt rage, white hot and consuming, flood through me. Eli, look at me. He turned slowly, his eyes red-rimmed. None of this is your fault. Not the stabbing. Not the investigation. Not your mother's choices. Dean hurt you. And when people hurt others, there are consequences. That's not you causing trouble, that's the truth coming to light. But what if nobody believes me? I believe you. The doctors believe you. The evidence believes you. I took his hand. And I promise you, sweetheart, the truth isn't trouble. It's light. And we're going to shine it into every dark corner until everyone sees what really happened. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, I'm scared. I know. I'm scared too. I squeezed his hand. But we're going to do this together. Okay? He nodded, leaning against my shoulder. Okay. The next morning, I drove to the District Child Protection Bureau and filed a formal report. The intake officer was a tired-looking woman named Patricia who'd probably heard 1,000 terrible stories and stopped being surprised by any of them. She took my documentation without comment, flipping through the medical records, the photographs, the timeline I'd constructed. And the mother, she asked. Where does she stand? She's supporting the stepfather, claiming it was an accident. Patricia's mouth tightened. That's not uncommon. People protect what's familiar, even when it's toxic. She stamped the report. This will be forwarded to the investigative team. They'll follow up within 72 hours. Thank you. She looked up at me. Ma'am, I have to tell you, cases like this don't always end the way we want them to. Families have a way of closing ranks. Evidence gets complicated. Memories change. Not this time, I said quietly. I hope you're right. From there, I drove directly to the county prosecutor's office. I'd called ahead, requesting a meeting with someone who handled juvenile assault cases. They'd connected me with Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Torres, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an economy of movement that suggested she didn't waste time on bullshit. I'd brought everything. Medical records, photographs, call logs, my own handwritten timeline. The cease and desist letter. Screenshots of Dean's social media posts mocking Eli. I laid it all out on her desk like evidence at trial. Torres didn't interrupt. She read through each document carefully, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at me. Mrs. Charlton, I'm going to be direct with you. This is a strong case. The medical evidence alone is damning. But you need to prepare yourself for what comes next. The defense will argue this was horseplay gone wrong. They'll paint Dean as a troubled kid who made a mistake. They'll paint you as a vindictive grandmother with a grudge. Let them try. She smiled faintly. You've done your homework. I spent 35 years in trauma. I know how to document the truth. Good. Because that's exactly what we need. She closed the file. I'll take it from here. We'll move forward with charges, assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment. Depending on how the evidence shakes out, possibly attempted murder. I felt something loosen in my chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. They're going to come after you. I know. She studied me for a moment. Why are you doing this? Most families would have swept it under the rug by now. Because someone has to fight for the truth, I said quietly. And if I don't, Eli will spend the rest of his life believing his pain doesn't matter. Torres nodded slowly. Then let's make sure he knows it does. 2 days later, Harold received the court summons. I wasn't there when it happened, but Lydia called me 30 minutes later, her voice shaking so hard I could barely understand her. Mom. What have you done? I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, and felt perfectly calm. I've done what you should have done years ago, Lydia. I've told the truth. They're charging Dean with assault. With attempted murder. Do you understand what that means? He could go to prison. His life will be ruined. He stabbed your son and laughed about it. He's 17. And Eli is 16. What's your point? Silence. Then, quietly, bitterly, I'll never forgive you for this. I know, I said. But Eli will. She hung up. I set the phone down and looked at the evidence file spread across my kitchen table, dozens of pages, photographs, medical reports, witness statements. The truth, laid bare. And somewhere in Harold Harper's expensive house, a boy who thought he was untouchable was finally learning otherwise. The courtroom smelled like old wood and anxiety. I sat in the second row behind the prosecution table, my hands folded in my lap, back straight, wearing the same navy blouse I'd worn to Marcus's funeral and Lydia's wedding to Harold. It had become my armor, the outfit I wore when I needed to be unshakable. Across the aisle, the Harper family occupied their own row like visiting dignitaries. Harold wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression one of weary patience, a good man enduring a terrible misunderstanding. Lydia sat beside him in a cream-colored dress, her hands trembling in her lap, tissue clutched between her fingers. She looked fragile. Wounded. And Dean sat between them, 17 years old and dressed like he was attending a country club luncheon, pressed khakis, navy blazer, tie perfectly knotted. His lawyer had clearly coached him. Sit up straight. Look remorseful. Don't smirk. But I could see it in his eyes. That flicker of contempt. The absolute certainty that this was all theater, that he'd walk out of here the same way he'd walked out of every other consequence in his life, untouched. He caught me looking and held my gaze for just a second. You can't touch me, his eyes said. I looked away. Not because I was intimidated. Because I knew something he didn't. Judge Abrams entered, and we all stood. He was in his mid-60s, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had seen everything twice and wasn't impressed either time. He settled into his seat, adjusted his glasses, and scanned the courtroom with the expression of a man about to wade through another mess. Be seated, he said. We're here for the matter of the state versus Dean Harper. Charges include assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and obstruction of justice. Counsel, are we ready to proceed? Dean's lawyer stood smoothly. Martin Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore and Associates, 62 years old and expensive in every way that mattered. His voice was warm, avuncular, the kind that made juries trust him instinctively. Your Honor, the defense is ready. Though I must say, we're prepared to demonstrate that this case is, at its core, a tragic domestic melodrama being prosecuted as a crime. Beside me, Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Torres didn't flinch. She simply stood, her movements economical and precise. The state is ready, Your Honor. And the evidence will show this is not melodrama. It's attempted murder. Judge Abrams gestured. Ms. Torres, you may begin. Torres approached the bench carrying a sealed medical file and a forensic analysis report. She moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times and won 900 of them. Your Honor, the state will present irrefutable evidence that on the night of October 3rd, the defendant Dean Harper deliberately stabbed 16-year-old Eli Morgan with a kitchen knife, causing life-threatening injuries. Further, we will demonstrate that the defendant's parents, Harold and Lydia Harper, actively obstructed emergency medical intervention and tampered with evidence in an attempt to cover up the crime. Whitmore rose. Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution is characterizing what was clearly an accident. Not an accident, Your Honor. Torres's voice cut through the courtroom like a scalpel. A deliberate act of violence. And the forensic evidence proves it beyond any doubt. Judge Abrams leaned back. I'll hear the evidence. Proceed. Torres opened the medical file. The victim, Eli Morgan, sustained a 4-inch laceration to the left thoracic cavity, penetrating the pleural membrane and causing a partial pneumothorax, a collapsed lung. The attending surgeon, Dr. Jennifer Sullivan, documented the wound pattern in detail. She pulled out an enlarged photograph of the surgical notes and placed it on the easel facing the judge. Even from where I sat, I could see the diagram, the angle of entry, the depth, the trajectory. The wound, Torres continued, entered at a 45-degree downward angle. Forensic analysis confirms this is consistent with an assailant standing over the victim and driving the blade downward with deliberate force. It is not consistent with a fall, a slip, or any accidental motion. Whitmore stood again. Your Honor, boys roughhouse. In the chaos of the moment. There was no chaos, Mr. Whitmore. Torres didn't even glance at him. The crime scene was the Harper family kitchen at 2:17 a.m. The victim was seated when he was attacked. The defendant was standing. The blood spatter pattern confirms the victim remained stationary while bleeding. There was no struggle, no roughhousing. Just a deliberate stabbing. She pulled out another photograph. Crime scene image, the kitchen floor. The blood pool was dark and concentrated in one area, exactly where Eli had been sitting when I'd arrived. The forensic blood pattern analyst confirmed that the victim did not move after being stabbed. He sat against the cabinet, applied pressure to his own wound, and waited for help that his own mother refused to call. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Torres turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to play the 911 call. Proceed. The courtroom went silent as the audio crackled to life. 911, what's your emergency? This is Keira Charlton, retired RN. I have a 16-year-old male with a puncture wound to the left thoracic cavity, significant blood loss, signs of shock. I need an ambulance immediately. Ma'am, are you on scene? Yes. I arrived approximately 15 minutes ago. The victim called me at 2:17 a.m. stating he'd been stabbed by his stepbrother. When I arrived, the parents were present but had not called for medical assistance. They didn't call 911? No. They were actively discouraging intervention. The mother washed the weapon while the victim was still bleeding. The courtroom erupted. Judge Abrams slammed his gavel. Order. I watched Harold's face drain of color. Lydia's hands shook so hard she dropped her tissue. Dean's smirk had finally disappeared. Torres waited for silence, then continued. The 9/11 timestamp confirms that 26 minutes elapsed between the stabbing and the emergency call, a call that was only made because the victim's grandmother arrived on scene. During those 26 minutes, the defendant's parents made no attempt to render aid or contact emergency services. She pulled out another document. This is a cease and desist letter sent by Mr. Whitmore's firm to Mrs. Charlton on October 10, threatening her with defamation charges if she continued to report the crime. The Harpers were not concerned with their son's medical recovery. They were concerned with controlling the narrative. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Your Honor, that letter was sent in good faith. In good faith? Torres's voice sharpened. Your clients attempted to intimidate a witness into silence while their son recovered from a life-threatening assault. That's not good faith, Mr. Whitmore. That's obstruction of justice. Judge Abrams made a note. Continue, Ms. Torres. Finally, Your Honor, the weapon. She gestured to the evidence table, where a kitchen knife sat sealed in plastic. Forensic analysis recovered only one set of fingerprints from this knife, Dean Harper's. The defendant's exclusive prints are on the handle in a gripping pattern consistent with a stabbing motion. She turned to face the courtroom. This was not an accident. This was not roughhousing. This was a deliberate attempt to cause serious bodily harm that would have been fatal without immediate medical intervention. She sat down. The silence was deafening. Judge Abrams turned to Whitmore. Does the defense wish to respond? Whitmore stood, but for the first time, he looked uncertain. Your Honor, we acknowledge that the incident was tragic. But the defendant is a 17-year-old boy with no prior criminal history. He made a terrible mistake in the heat of a domestic dispute. Counselor. Judge Abrams's voice was ice. I've reviewed the forensic analysis. I've heard the 911 recording. I've examined the medical documentation. This is not a mistake. This is a deliberate act of violence followed by a coordinated cover-up. He turned to Dean. Mr. Harper, stand up. Dean stood slowly, his face pale. Did you stab Eli Morgan on the night of October 3rd? Whitmore touched Dean's arm. Your Honor, we invoke the defendant's Fifth Amendment. I'm not asking for a confession, Mr. Whitmore. I'm asking if the defendant disputes the forensic evidence. Silence. Dean's hands were shaking now. The courtroom composure, the coached remorse, the carefully maintained image, it was all crumbling. Your Honor, Whitmore said carefully, my client maintains that the incident was accidental. Then explain the wound trajectory. Explain the blood pattern. Explain why your client's fingerprints are the only ones on the weapon. Judge Abrams leaned forward. Or admit that this was deliberate and we can discuss appropriate sentencing. Dean's breathing quickened. He looked at his father. Harold's face was ashen, his perfect composure finally shattered. Dean's voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to. Dean, don't say anything, Whitmore hissed. But it was too late. The panic was visible now, the arrogance gone. He was mocking me, Dean said, his voice rising. He's always mocking me, looking at me like he's better than me, and I just wanted him to shut up. That's enough. Whitmore grabbed his arm. But Judge Abrams had heard everything he needed to hear. The judge sat back, his expression grim. I've presided over juvenile cases for 19 years. I've seen accidents. I've seen fights that escalated beyond control. This is neither. He looked at Dean. This is a premeditated act of violence committed by someone who believed he was entitled to harm another person without consequence. He turned to Harold and Lydia. And it was enabled by parents who prioritized their own comfort over their child's safety. Lydia let out a choked sob. Judge Abrams opened the sentencing guidelines. Dean Harper, you are hereby remanded to juvenile custody pending final sentencing. The charges of assault with a deadly weapon and reckless endangerment stand. I am also referring charges of obstruction of justice and child endangerment to the prosecutor's office for Harold and Lydia Harper. The gavel came down. Crack. The sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Dean staggered. Harold grabbed the bench in front of him. Lydia collapsed into her seat, sobbing. And I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, and exhaled for the first time in months. Outside the courtroom, Torres found me in the hallway. You did good work, Mrs. Charlton. Thank you. How does it feel? I thought about that for a moment. Justice doesn't heal everything, I said quietly. But it stops the bleeding. She nodded. That's all we can do sometimes. I watched through the courtroom windows as Dean was led away in handcuffs, his perfect blazer rumpled, his face streaked with tears. The truth had finally caught up to him. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. 1 year later. The coastal town smelled like salt and sun-warmed wood. I stood at the kitchen window of our small rental house, watching the morning light spread across the water like melted gold. Gulls circled and called. The tide was coming in. Everything here moved at its own rhythm, patient, inevitable, unhurried. It had taken us 3 months to find this place. 3 months of searching for somewhere far enough from the wreckage of what our family had been, close enough to the ocean that Eli could hear the waves at night and remember that the world was bigger than his pain. The house was nothing special, 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, a yard that was more sand than grass. But it was ours. And it was quiet in a way that felt like healing instead of silence. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Eli shuffling into the kitchen, still half asleep, his hair sticking up in every direction. He was wearing an old t-shirt from the Marine Center where he volunteered 3 days a week, helping catalog rescued sea turtles and assist with educational programs for school groups. He'd grown taller this year. Filled out a little. The hollow look in his eyes, the one that had made him seem perpetually haunted, had started to fade around month 5, replaced by something softer. Not happiness, not yet. But the possibility of it. Morning, Grandma, he mumbled, opening the refrigerator. Morning, sweetheart. There's fresh coffee if you want it. He made a face. I'm 16, not 40. 17 in 2 months. Still not 40. He pulled out orange juice instead, poured himself a glass, and leaned against the counter. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. He studied me with the careful attention he developed over the past year, the habit of watching people's faces for signs of distress, of reading silences for hidden meanings. Trauma did that. It taught you to monitor the emotional weather around you constantly, always prepared for the next storm. You okay? He asked. I smiled. I'm fine. Just thinking. About? How much better you look now than you did a year ago. He glanced down at himself, touched the scar on his left side absently, a gesture that had become automatic, like checking that something fragile was still intact. I feel better. Most days. Most days is good. Yeah. He took a sip of juice. Dr. Halloran says that's normal. That healing isn't linear. Dr. Halloran was Eli's therapist, a gentle, methodical man in his 50s who specialized in trauma recovery. Eli had been seeing him twice a week since we'd moved here. At first, he'd hated it. Resisted it. Said he didn't need someone poking around in his head, making him relive everything. But slowly, session by session, something had shifted. He'd started sleeping through the night. Started eating without being reminded. Started talking about the future in sentences that didn't end with maybe, or I don't know. Progress wasn't loud. It was incremental. Fragile. But it was real. Dr. Halloran's smart, I said. Yeah. He also says you should probably talk to someone too. I raised an eyebrow. Does he now? He didn't say it directly. But he kind of implied that maybe the person who fought a legal battle and uprooted her whole life might have some feelings to process. Eli's mouth quirked. Direct quote, "Trauma doesn't discriminate based on who was holding the knife." I felt something tighten in my chest. I'll think about it. Grandma. I will. I promise. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. We stood there in comfortable silence, drinking our respective beverages, watching the light change on the water. This was what mornings looked like now. Quiet. Simple. Safe. It still felt impossible sometimes. After Eli left for his shift at the Marine Center, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea. I had a routine now. Mornings were for correspondence, for tying up loose ends from the life we'd left behind, for managing the small administrative tasks that came with relocating. I opened my email. There were the usual messages, appointment reminders, newsletters I'd forgotten to unsubscribe from, a note from Dr. Myers asking how we were settling in. And then, sitting at the top of my inbox like a stone in still water, was a message from Lydia. Subject, please read this. My hand hovered over the mouse. I hadn't spoken to my daughter in 11 months. Not since the sentencing hearing, when she'd screamed at me across the courthouse steps that I'd destroyed her family, that I'd turned her son against her, that everything that had happened was my fault for refusing to let it go. I'd walked away without responding. What was there to say? She'd chosen her reality. I'd chosen the truth. And those two things could not coexist. I clicked the email open. Mom. I don't know if you'll even read this. Part of me hopes you won't. But I need to say it anyway. It's been almost a year. Dean is still in juvenile detention. Harold and I are in court-mandated counseling. We've been ordered to attend parenting classes and submit to regular home inspections as part of our probation. Our lives have been completely upended. We've all suffered because of this, Mom. Not just Eli. All of us. I know you think I'm a terrible mother. I know you think I chose Harold and Dean over my own son. But you don't understand what it's like to try to hold a blended family together. You don't understand the pressure, the impossible choices, the constant feeling that no matter what you do, someone gets hurt. I was trying to protect everyone. I was trying to keep the peace. Harold says you always hated him. That you were looking for an excuse to tear us apart. And I defended you, Mom. For months, I defended you. But now I don't know what to believe anymore. Dean made a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. But he's not a monster. He's a 17-year-old kid who's been through hell because of his parents' divorce, and he acted out in the worst possible way. Does he deserve to have his entire future destroyed because of one moment? I'm not saying Eli didn't suffer. I know he did. I know he almost died. But he's alive. He's okay. Can't that be enough? Please, Mom. I'm begging you. Don't hate us. Don't hate me. I'm still your daughter. And I need my mother. Lydia. I read the email twice. Then I sat back and stared at the screen, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my stomach. We've all suffered. Can't that be enough? Don't hate us. It was the same thing. The same circular logic, the same refusal to accept responsibility, the same attempt to rewrite history into something more palatable. Lydia hadn't changed. She just found new language for the same old denials. She still believed this was about me hating Harold. About me being vindictive. About me refusing to understand. She still didn't see that this had never been about her marriage or her choices or her need for stability. It had been about a 16-year-old boy bleeding out on a kitchen floor while his mother washed evidence down the sink. And she still couldn't admit that. I moved the cursor to the delete button. My finger hovered. For a moment, I thought about responding. About trying one more time to make her understand. About explaining, clearly and calmly, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, that healing didn't require me to absolve her of accountability, that I could love her and still refuse to participate in her denial. But I knew it wouldn't matter. People only hear what they're ready to hear. And Lydia wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. I clicked delete. The email vanished. And I felt something inside me release, not bitterness, not anger. Just a quiet, final letting go. Forgiveness is not forgetting, I whispered to the empty kitchen. It's freedom. That afternoon, I worked in the garden. It wasn't much, a small plot behind the house where I'd planted tomatoes, basil, lavender, and a few wildflowers that attracted bees. Gardening had never been my thing before. I'd always been too busy, too focused on work, too practical to spend time coaxing things out of the dirt. But there was something meditative about it now. The ritual of watering, weeding, tending. The patience it required. The faith that if you did the work, something would grow. I was deadheading the lavender when I heard Eli's voice from the porch. "Grandma, I'm home." I looked up. He was standing at the railing, sunburned and grinning, holding what looked like a small cardboard box. "Good day?" I called. "Great day. We released 3 juvenile greens back into the ocean." And look, he bounded down the steps and opened the box carefully. Inside was a tiny hermit crab, no bigger than a quarter. Found him stranded near the tidipools. Gonna set up a little habitat until he's strong enough to go back. I smiled. "He's lucky you found him." "Yeah, well." Eli shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Dr. Halloran says helping other things heal helps you heal too." Or something like that. Dr. Halloran is very wise. He's also kind of a hippie. But yeah. Eli grinned and headed inside with his tiny rescue. I watched him go, this boy who'd been so broken a year ago, who'd barely been able to look people in the eye, who'd flinched at sudden movements and had nightmares that left him gasping for air. He wasn't whole yet. Maybe he never would be, not completely. Trauma left marks that didn't fully fade. But he was healing. He was laughing. He was finding purpose in small, quiet acts of care. And that was enough. That evening, we sat on the porch together watching the sunset. The sky was layered in shades of amber and rose and violet, the kind of colors that didn't seem real until you saw them reflected on the water. Eli had his hermit crab habitat set up on the railing, checking on it every few minutes like a new parent. "You think he'll make it?" I asked. "I think so. He's stubborn. Keeps trying to climb out even though he's too weak." Sounds familiar. Eli glanced at me, then smiled faintly. "Yeah. I guess." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade. "Grandma? Do you ever regret it? What you did?" I looked at him. "Do you?" He thought about that for a long moment. "Sometimes I wish it hadn't been so hard. I wish Mom had believed me. I wish Harold and Dean had just been different people." He touched his scar again. "But no. I don't regret telling the truth. Even when it hurt." "Good. Do you?" I thought about the courtroom. The gavel coming down. Dean's face as he was led away in handcuffs. Lydia's sobs. The cease and desist letter, the threats, the sleepless nights building evidence, the constant fear that it wouldn't be enough. And I thought about this, Eli, sitting beside me, healthy and whole and learning to believe that his pain mattered. "No," I said quietly. "I don't regret it. Even though you lost Mom?" The question hung in the air between us. I didn't lose her, sweetheart. She lost herself. And maybe someday she'll find her way back. But even if she doesn't. I reached over and squeezed his hand. I'll never regret choosing you. His eyes went shiny. He looked away quickly, blinking hard. Thanks, Grandma. Always. Later that night, after Eli had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen. I'd started writing letters a few months ago. Letters I never sent. Letters to Lydia, to Harold, to the version of myself who'd sat in that hospital waiting room a year ago wondering if she was doing the right thing. Tonight, I wrote to Dean. Dear Dean. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I want you to. But I need you to understand something. What you did that night wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just anger. It was a choice to hurt someone smaller and more vulnerable than you because you could. Because you believed you'd get away with it. And for a while, you were right. Your father's money, your mother's denial, your own arrogance, it all protected you. It made you believe that consequences were for other people. But here's what I want you to know, the truth doesn't care about money. It doesn't care about denial. And it doesn't go away just because people refuse to look at it. I hope someday you understand what you did. I hope you feel genuine remorse. I hope you learn that being entitled to hurt people isn't strength, it's cowardice. But whether you do or not, Eli is healing. He's building a life that doesn't include you. And he's learning that his pain mattered, that someone fought for him, that the world isn't entirely made of people who look away. That's more than you gave him. That's more than you deserve. Keira. I folded the letter carefully and added it to the box where I kept all the others. Someday, maybe I'd burn them. Or maybe I'd keep them as a record of everything we'd survived. For now, it was enough to have written them. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves and birdsong. Eli was already up, sitting on the porch with his coffee. He'd started drinking it recently, despite his earlier protests, watching the sunrise with his hermit crab perched on his palm. Morning, I said, joining him. Morning. Look, he climbed out of the habitat on his own. I think he's getting stronger. I think you're right. We sat together in the growing light, watching the ocean roll in and out, patient and eternal. And I thought about the gavel coming down in that courtroom a year ago. The sharp, final crack that had split the silence our family had lived in for so long. For years, they'd called me dramatic. Too harsh. Too loud. Too emotional. Too unwilling to let things go. But when the truth finally spoke, it didn't need volume. It only needed evidence. And in the end, that was enough. The gavel split the air that day, and with it, the silence that had ruled our family for too long. But here, on this quiet morning, with my grandson healing beside me and the ocean stretching endlessly before us, I understood something I hadn't known before. Justice doesn't erase pain. It doesn't undo what was done. But it does this, it tells the truth. It says, out loud and on the record, that what happened mattered. That the victim's pain was real. That cruelty has consequences. And sometimes, that's the only foundation strong enough to rebuild on. Eli would carry his scar forever. So would I. But we were free. And that was everything.